Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. For more than 13 years, I've been handcrafting these sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, I love spotlighting diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. I invite you to listen up and change the way you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Alrighty then, let's dive in. This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about cognitive immunity, protection and preservation of humanity through better thinking. My guest today is Dr. Andy Norman. For those of you who listen to the show, you might recall that Andy Norman is big on mental immunity. Yes, it's a thing. He's an award-winning author of Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas and Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy's work has appeared in Scientific American, Psychology Today, Psychiatric Times, Skeptic, Free Inquiry, and The Humanist. He has appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, NPR, and the BBC's Naked Scientist. Andy's research illuminates the evolutionary origins of human reasoning, the norms that make dialogue fruitful, and the workings of the mind's immune system. He champions the emerging science of mental immunity as the antidote to disinformation, propaganda, hate, and division. Andy Norman is the founder of the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, also known as CIRCE, which is a global think tank leading the effort to inoculate humanity against cognitive contagion. And that is a mouthful, but it's super important. And that's why he is back, because if you want to be happier, you got to use your mind, dang it.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Lisa. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, that is all you. And I am very taken with the skill of critical thinking, because I think that if anybody wants to ride the tsunami of life, right? You know, the ups and downs of life, the waves of life, that we have to cultivate this muscle within us in order to continue to operate and find some level of happiness when we can't control what's going on out there.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of critical thinking as well. And I think there's lots of research now that suggests that good critical thinkers tend to flourish more and they are happier. There is one way in which the concept of critical thinking, I think, falls short of the ideal. It's still something of a black box. People who spend a lot of time teaching critical thinking often have very different definitions of what critical thinking is. And of course, it's possible to be too critical for your own good. And that's a fact that much traditional critical thinking instruction has yet to incorporate. So I'm really excited about this new science of mental immunity, because it actually helps to clarify what it means to think critically and well.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that critical thinking has the possibility of also separating us and dividing us further. In other words, you can box yourself out of the flow of life with too much critical thinking and not enough discernment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people end up sort of hyper skeptical or hyper suspicious of many things, and they fancy themselves good critical thinkers. And being suitably suspicious is, of course, better than being indiscriminately gullible. But you can be too suspicious for your own good. So the nice thing about suspicion and criticism is that it can help screen out falsehoods and bad ideas. But if you're too skeptical or too critical, then you end up screening out a lot of truths and good ideas, right? So there has
Yes.
to be a balance. And my colleague Melanie, who I think is going to appear on the show as well, talks about a Goldilocks zone between being too suspicious and too trusting.
Let's just tap into the CIRCE partners for a minute, because I know we're gonna save that for later in the show. But you have assembled this incredible group of minds from all over the world, from multiple disciplines, coming to the table with their perspective and their process for becoming more mentally immune to misinformation.
Yeah, and I mean, the short version of the story is that I kind of stumbled and bumbled upon this idea of mental immunity, and it really resonates with a lot of people these days because they understand that in a digital age, we all need to get better at spotting and weeding out sketchy information. So some of the top psychologists in the world, neuroscientists, critical thinking instructors, public philosophers have all kind of rallied to my call for a science of mental immunity. And I'm just enormously gratified that so many people so much smarter and wiser than I have rallied to this cause. And I think it's because it's the right idea at the right time. And it's really exciting what these guys are doing. And I can't wait to share some of what they're doing with your listeners.
It's so exciting. And that's why I'm so grateful to you for believing in us to help get the word out and, partner with us to create a series, which is what this is a part of, introducing a series on mental immunity to our listeners and to the world, because the time is now as we head into the election cycle, as we continue on this path of polarization. The antidote isn't to try and get the other to come to our side or vice versa, but to develop these skills that allow us to, I think, be better people, be better communicators, and
to dialogue.
Bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
To really dialogue. So it turns out that the ability to just dialogue in a compassionate, charitable way is critical to good thinking. So when a culture war breaks out and people just start sniping at each other, thinking skills start to corrode and they can actually collapse dramatically. And this is, if you look back at history through this lens, you start to see that many magnificent civilizations actually fell apart because internal partisanship just turned otherwise thinking people into reactive people who just were angry all the time. And so to pull back from the edge, we need to learn again how to think collaboratively and to charitably help each other spot our bad ideas, but work together towards deeper common understanding. All good thinking has that as its end. And when you're just trying to win and score political points, you're compromising your own ability to think well.
Let me ask you a little bit about ideas. And this relates to misinformation. Somebody has an idea that they want to put out a social media post or an ad about something that only has a tiny, tiny pin drop of truth to it. Right? And it goes out in the world. It then turns into gospel. And then we have to tease it out and put it to rest. I mean, this is kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so most myths and false narratives have a germ of truth in them, and that usually helps them get started. But if the narrative has certain seductive qualities, if it's really good at getting its hooks into people and getting them to share it with others, and so Mark Twain said, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can even get its boots on. Oof. He knew even back then that the bad ideas can spread virally. And this happened long before the internet. But of course, the internet kind of turbocharges the viral spread of sketchy information. It's hard to deprogram somebody who's bought in to an emotionally charged idea because they start to identify that idea becomes part of them and they want to defend it. And it becomes hard to think in a even-handed way about it. So the real solution to this problem is to try to keep the genie in the bottle You try to spot the bad ideas and the misinformation and the false narratives before they spread widely. What you need to do is develop enough skepticism so that you say, oh, hang on a second here, I'm not so sure I'm ready to believe or share that. And if we get enough people to do that in a responsible way, then the internet becomes a much less hospitable place for infodemics and crazy conspiracy theories.
Does this start with the very primal human desire to belong?
It really does. I think it does, right? We know that we evolved from critters from hominids that had a deeply collaborative mode of existence, that if you were in good standing in the tribe, you had a good chance of surviving. But if you were exiled from the tribe, your chances of passing on your genes would plummet. So we evolved traits that make us want to belong, because belonging is really important to us. This is something I think we should sympathize with and celebrate. Belonging matters. We all need to be part of something larger than ourselves, and to be cared about, have others care about us. And it actually proves really good for your own mental health to care about other people. And you know that. But the problem is that our tribal instincts can kind of get hijacked by partisan culture warriors or peddlers of disinformation or divisive ideologues.
And the media and people propagating this stuff know that, right? I mean, it's a known vulnerability because we want to belong, because we want to identify with a tribe, that we will, in many cases, just subscribe to the rhetoric of that tribe, whether we really want to believe it or not. Like, it doesn't actually matter because it's more about the belonging to the club than the message.
That's right. And so we all need to kind of take a step back from our reflexive tribal allegiances and say, hang on a second here. Sometimes my own tribe needs to be truth checked too. And there are ways to do that. There are ways to truth check your own tribe that don't threaten your standing within it. That there are nice ways to say, hang on a second, buddy. I know we see eye to eye about lots of things, but I'm not so sure about this. Can we look at it together? It doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't have to be bitter. It doesn't have to be enmity producing, or it doesn't have to result in your exile from the tribe. You just need to be comfortable with a certain amount you need to learn how to enjoy and manage conversational conflict in a constructive, productive way, right? Not all conflict is bad. It's just that conflict waged poorly can be very destructive.
And I think that within CIRCE and within some of these amazing experts that we're going to get to interview and share, we are going to learn very simple techniques to improve, to do that in a more kind human way. And asking these big, powerful, open-ended questions, I find, is a good conversation starter.
I'm glad you think so. I think you and I mean this in the best possible way. You've got a philosophical streak that I really like.
Well, I want to know. I do. Thank you. I do want to know. Like, I actually enjoy learning about people who think differently than me and the why.
Yeah, you can learn more from people who think differently than you can from people who think the same.
But I will say that, and I don't know if you share this experience as well, that in the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, as things became more disconnected within families, within friendships, within professional, business culture, because there was polarization politically, in asking the other about their why, I think there was fear or shame in trying to explain it.
Fear or shame in trying to explain what?
Their why. Like and I'm thinking specifically of a colleague that worked with our team for many, many years. And during the last election cycle, I learned that we had very different views, and which is fine. No problem with that. And I said to her, I would like to understand why. She's from Wisconsin. So she is in part of the Rust Belt, and her
belief system and her daily life experience was very different than mine.
Yes.
And she said, I'm going to write to you the why. And she never did. And I said, I really want to know. I want to understand, because at the end of the day, we're humans, right? And humans,
Right.
our desire for, safety, shelter, a decent life, our families to thrive, that is everywhere in the world. There's not one person in the world that wants something different than that.
And philosophers like myself are almost always want to drill down to the why and make sure we really understand the reasons behind things. But some people find that threatening, right? Or those questions themselves. I think they fear that such questions can kind of sort of destabilize their identity or destabilize their belief system. I want to send out a reassuring word. I've been teaching philosophy for about 30 years and taught thousands of students. And many students come into an introduction to philosophy class kind of worried that, these deep questions are going to completely turn their worldviews upside down and leave them rootless or something. And what I'm really good at doing with kids who are in my care for a semester is show them that there's nothing scary at all about asking these deep questions. There's nothing to fear. You ask them and it turns out that there's so much to gain and so little to lose if you explore these questions in an open, honest way.
And this is the beauty of CIRCE and the Mental Immunity Project, is sounding the bell, like the time has come for us to stand up and embrace these principles for our own good and the greater good. And I think that's the thing that attracts me most about this subject matter, is it's not just for my own consumption, right?
Yeah, thank you. Let me say a little bit more about the Mental Immunity Project and how it's trying to do that. You mentioned sounding the bell.
Yes, but we're sounding the bell, but we're also sounding the bell for a quick break. So let me take us there. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Andy Norman. To learn more about Andy Norman and CIRCE and the Mental Immunity Project, for now, go to andynorman.org and on Twitter, or I guess it's X now, at Dr. Andy No, and on Facebook, Andy Norman Author. We're talking about mental immunity, infectious ideas, mind parasites, and the search for a better way to think. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back.
Hang on just a minute here. Before we take that pause, let's talk about the greatness of good hair days. Let's face it, the holidays were hectic, and if you're anything like me, you're facing forward into a new year with a commitment to better self-care. Self-care is not an indulgence, but a necessity for the mind, body, and emotions, including our hair. And that's why I'm going from shower to salon quality hair in just 5 minutes with Ouai's new hair gloss. Ouai's new hair gloss gives immediate shine, helps treat damage, and enhances color vibrancy that radiates fabulous hair, not to mention providing heat protection against styling tools. The beauty of Ouai's new hair gloss is that my hair goes from drab to sparkling after a 5-minute treatment made with hyaluronic acid and rice water. According to a recent user perception study, 85% of participants agreed that their hair looks shinier, healthier, and smoother after use. Ouai offers a complete hair care solution that promotes fuller looking, healthier feeling, and happier hair for everyone. Fine, medium, or thick hair, Ouai has got you covered. This year, give yourself the gift of great self-care and good hair days with Ouai's bestsellers like their leave-in conditioner, detox shampoo, travel destination-inspired fragrances, and hair oil. Give your hair a glow-up with Ouai. Go to theouai.com and use promo code HH for 15% off any product. That's theouai.com, promo code HH. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back. Each day we have the intellectual freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, regardless of external circumstance. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, seek support because good psychological health is vital in the achievement of a happy and satisfying life. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial educational resources to boost emotional and social intelligence. Like what you hear on Harvesting Happiness? Sharing is caring. Pay it forward by spreading the word to your community and through social media. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. And we're back, continuing the conversation about cognitive immunity, protection and preservation of humanity through better thinking. Let's get back to it with Dr. Andy Norman.
So, Andy, prior to the break, I cut you off as you were diving into Mental Immunity Project and CIRCE. And now I'm going to step back and let you step forward.
Well, you gave me such a wonderful entree to one of the things I wanted to share with your listeners. You talked about CIRCE, this institute that I run, sounding the bell. We are trying to raise awareness of the importance of cultivating healthy mental immune systems. And we're doing that. One way we're sounding that bell is we issued a declaration now signed by about 100 scientists that all say this new science has arrived, that it's real, and that it can really help us adapt to this brave new digital world we have. I'd encourage people to seek out our mental immunity declaration if you're interested in the science. But for the less geeky among you, those of you who just want to know, tell me what the practical impact, what's the practical takeaway of the science? We've also created a whole new website to kind of convey the practical implications of this new science. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand them. In fact, we basically reduced it to 10 very simple rules of thumb, which if you practice on them a little bit each day, you will become, over time, dramatically less susceptible to misinformation and actually wiser and happier. So we're really excited about that. Mentalimmunityproject.org is the website that shares these principles. And we're really proud of it. We hope people will explore it. But if you explore the larger ecosystem that the website ecosystem, you'll also probably come across our mental immunity declaration if you want to learn more about the science.
And there are a lot of resources over there.
Yeah.
For the curious.
Yes. Well, the geekier resources are at cognitivimmunology.org. I'm sorry, cognitivimmunology.net. Excuse me. And the stuff stripped of geek speak is on mentalimmunityproject.org.
And there are trainings. I mean, there are trainings for kids. One of your partners who I absolutely adore and got to spend some time with the other day is Melanie Tresick King. She has developed incredible curriculum to teach this to younger people, but it's kind of ubiquitous. There's no age limit to teaching this.
No, there isn't. I think we can get a lot of bang for our buck by teaching young people these skills. So Melanie has this wonderful way of putting it. If you lock kids up in classrooms for the first 20 years of their lives and only just feed them a steady diet of good information, then they're not prepared to handle bad information when they get it. So if you're just kind of just reciting facts from textbooks, minds kind of get lazy and unable to discriminate between good stuff and bad stuff. The best teachers in the world create these dynamic learning environments where good ideas and bad ideas all get mixed up together, and you have to work together to sort out which is which.
Makes perfect sense, right? It sets us up for real world problems outside of the classroom.
You got it. So one of the ways Melanie does this, right, is to, you talk to her. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I talked to her, and our listeners are going to get to listen to her both on harvesting happiness and a new little special project that I want to give a little plug to. We are going to embark in the Substack world and create some special content just for the partnership between CIRCE, the Mental Immunity Project, and Harvesting Happiness, to get our listeners to engage with mental immunity practices. And so that's kind of a new thing that we're doing. I'm coming into the next century along with everybody else. Finally.
And you're dragging me into the next century.
Yes, and I'm dragging you, but we're going together. So we're going to find our way, which is really super. And I can't say enough about this. And when I think about how we lead in terms of we are all being leaders, right? even if we don't lead a company or we're not leading a classroom or we're not leading a household, we are leaders. And so
Mm.
for me, my view is that this stuff, having cognitive immunity and good critical thinking, is important, an important leadership skill.
Yeah. I mean, one way to put that point, I guess, would be that, every human being kind of looks to other human beings to sort of just to learn how to act, how to behave, like what's normal, what's
Right.
what's appropriate behavior. So even if you don't try to lead, you by example, you're setting precedents for others, and we all have the option of setting good precedents as opposed to bad ones. But you need to be a little bit careful. You need to be a critical thinker. You need mental immunity to do that well. Fortunately, it doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. It can be a lot of fun, and that questioning and engaging in healthy dialogue and not minimizing the other person for their views or their opinion, right? Because we all have these very different lived experiences that we bring to the table that help shape these views, whether or not they're accurate or not.
Can I tell you a story on that front? So
Yes.
yeah, so I went to grad school in philosophy, and I immersed myself in this really arcane discipline, and then I came out and started teaching. And at first, I'd invite students to open up and share their ideas, and I didn't initially. I'd be able to spot the flaws in what they were saying very easily because I had years of more experience than they did. And I tried to interest them in critical thinking by being critical of them. And that just did not work well, right? So I had to learn an entirely new way. What I ended up realizing is that you should always try to find something you can appreciate in what the other person is saying first. Share your appreciation for what they get right, or at least almost get right. And say, hey, so I'd often tell my students, that's a really interesting insight. I'm going to recommend that you put it a little bit differently, because that way of putting it creates problems that you're not in a position to see yet. But here's the insight behind this. And I think you're right. And that's an important contribution to the discussion. Of course, we also have to acknowledge these other things.
Yes, that's excellent, especially when you're having a conversation with somebody who feels so strongly about their views that they are going to die on holding that flag, right?
Yeah. And it's almost always the case that there's a germ of truth, even in what the most misguided people are saying. Or if it's not truth, they at least might have read it on a website they trust, and to that extent, you can show them sympathy and rather than derision.
It's interesting when we look at life in America and the evolution of American life. Yes, this country has problems. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of people living in this country, right? It's hard to manage this many people and have everybody be in alignment with everything. I think the expectation of that is an irrational expectation, one that could never be fulfilled. So
the expectation that America run in perfect harmony.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Democracy is a messy thing.
It's very messy. Yeah.
I think somewhere along the line, many of us adopted a set of standards where we wanted something pure and conflict-free. And then politics just looks sordid and messy and ugly compared to that false ideal. And so we just give up on it, or say a pox on both their houses. I wash my hands of politics. But that's all an artifact of trying to compare real life with a false standard. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
If you set too high a bar and then just run around disappointed all the time, and how far we fall short of your ideal, you can get cynical and disillusioned and cranky, and that's not good for anybody.
No, and I think that spending so much time tied up in focusing on the things that are wrong, it's, in my mind, wherever you focus your attention is where you find yourself, right? So the challenge becomes being very, very measured. And this, again, is where the critical thinking and the cognitive immunology comes in, right? It's like you can only focus on that so much on a global or macro level or meta view. And then you've got to kind of reel it back in and say, okay, well, how can I impact my little environment, my community, my household, my family, my friends, for our good, and do things there? Because if everybody starts doing that, then you see the big picture starting to evolve as well.
Yeah, that's right. If Stephen Covey of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People had a neat way of putting this, that if you care about everything, but only have influence over a small percentage of what happens in the world, and just keep chafing at the discrepancy between all that you care about and how little you can affect, eventually that wears you down, and it disempowers you, makes you less effective. So sometimes you have to kind of just focus on the things you can control and not stop worrying about the things you can't. That's a healthier way to approach. Look, if you ask, you see the interviews of top athletes, and time and again, they basically say, I'm not going to worry about whether the quarterback is throwing me the ball enough. I'm just going to go out and do the best. I'm going to focus on what I can control. And the top performers in almost every field bring that attitude to the table.
We love control as humans. We crave a locus of control because it makes us feel safe. So if we're really seeking safety, if we're really seeking stability, I think going back to mental immunity, it's important to develop these skills because it helps bolster overall well-being, reduces stress on a physiological level as well. Absolutely. So we can be better thinkers and better executors of our ideas.
Yeah. And just so worrying about the world feeling out of control all the time, you're not doing yourself or your own mind any favors. And you can actually undermine your mind's ability to filter information properly in that way. You kind of have to tend to your own, you use the word measured, mindful and measured, I think. You have to be mindful about where you're putting your attention. And you need to always sort of measure the intensity of your emotional response to things. Make sure you don't overreact, because it's so easy to overreact to a world just full of viral memes, right? Memes that are actually designed to get a reaction.
To fire you up. To be fire starters, little small handfuls of kindling. There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
We are out of time for this episode. It always flies by so quickly. But before we go, I want to have you give a quick sampling of some of the amazing minds that our listeners can expect to hear from as part of this series, both on harvesting happiness and our new little side project, our side hustle.
Okay. Well, you mentioned my colleague, Melanie Tressa-King. She's CIRCE's education director, and she's, I think, one of the finest critical thinking instructors on the planet. So you'll get to hear from her, I think. Another is Sander van der Linden. He's a psychologist at Cambridge, and I think the most cited psychologist in the world right now. He studies how minds become more or less susceptible to misinformation, and has a wonderful book out called Foolproof that can help you become harder to fool.
Ooh.
Yeah. So Sander's terrific. There's a Dutch historian named Steya Hofhuis, who's just written a wonderful doctoral dissertation about the witchcraft panic in early modern Europe, and argues that episode is actually a case of a viral mind parasite. That, like, the best way he looks at all the different ways of explaining the witchcraft panic and said that the only explanation that really makes sense is that a viral idea infected minds and spread through a population in ways that harmed many people.
Wow.
And, right? Really powerful case study from history, and very well researched and very well argued. And after listening to Steya's stories, he'll help convince you that your mind is in fact prone to and probably even infected by some mind parasites as
Yeah,
as
we're vulnerable.
we're
I
vulnerable.
think that acknowledging that vulnerability is also part of this process too.
Absolutely.
And I want to add, we've got conversations with David Sampson and Lee McIntyre as well. And there are others. This is just a little sampling. So please tune in. We will make sure that we clearly mark these episodes as being part of the Mental Immunity Project and CIRCE. To learn more about Andy Norman, you can go to andynorman.org. For the Mental Immunity Project, for the less geeky, you can go to mentalimmunityproject.org. For the geeks out there, go to cognitivimmunology.net.
Perfect. Thank you.
Andy, can't wait for more. This is great.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of Dr. Andy Norman, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another. Want to take a deeper dive into sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content, More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available exclusively on Medium and Substack. Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime, anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by me, Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the awesome team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.